On the morning of June 6, 1944, while Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, a peculiar unit of American soldiers prepared for an entirely different kind of invasion. These weren't your typical infantrymen. Among them stood fashion designers from Fifth Avenue, advertising illustrators from Madison Avenue, set designers from Hollywood, and fine artists from Greenwich Village. They carried paintbrushes alongside their weapons, sketch pads tucked into their rucksacks. They were the Ghost Army, officially designated as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, and their mission was as audacious as it was unprecedented: to deceive the German Wehrmacht using nothing but creativity, illusion, and theatrical bravado. The story of how America weaponized its artists begins not on European battlefields, but in the desperate strategic calculations of 1942. The United States had entered World War II with industrial might but faced a cunning, experienced enemy. German forces had conquered most of Europe through superior tactics and brutal efficiency. American military planners realized that conventional warfare alone might not be enough. They needed innovation, misdirection, psychological warfare. Someone in the War Department had a radical idea. What if artists, trained to manipulate perception and create convincing illusions, could be transformed into tactical weapons? Major Ralph Ingersoll, a former publisher who had observed British deception units in North Africa, championed the concept. The British had already experimented with camouflage and dummy installations, but Ingersoll envisioned something far more ambitious. He wanted to create phantom armies that could fool German intelligence so completely that enemy divisions would be redeployed to face threats that didn't exist. According to historical documentation preserved in the National Archives, Ingersoll's proposal initially met with skepticism from traditional military brass who couldn't fathom how painters and sculptors could contribute to winning a war. But desperate times demanded creative solutions. By January 19, 1944, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was officially activated at Camp Forest, Tennessee. The recruitment process specifically targeted art schools, advertising agencies, and design studios. The Army needed individuals who understood perspective, shadow, light, and most crucially, how to make fiction appear as reality. They found their candidates at institutions like the Pratt Institute, the Philadelphia Museum School of Industrial Art, and Cooper Union. The unit assembled was extraordinary. Bill Blass, who would later become a legendary fashion designer, enlisted. So did Ellsworth Kelly, destined to become one of America's most celebrated abstract artists. Art Kane, the future renowned photographer, joined their ranks. These weren't men running from combat. They were volunteers who wanted to serve but would do so with the skills they had spent years cultivating. Most were in their early 20s, talented but unproven, eager to transform their creative abilities into something that could save lives and shorten the war. Their training began immediately, and unlike anything the military had attempted before. These artist soldiers learned to operate inflatable rubber tanks that could be erected in hours, weighted down with air compressors that kept them rigid. They practiced painting shadows on flat canvas to create three-dimensional illusions visible from German reconnaissance aircraft flying at 10,000 feet. They studied sound engineering, learning to broadcast recordings of tank divisions and artillery batteries from massive speakers mounted on trucks. Most importantly, they learned to think like battlefield commanders while maintaining the mindset of stage directors, orchestrating elaborate theatrical productions where the audience was the enemy and the stakes were measured in human lives. The Ghost Army sailed for England in early May 1944, arriving at a staging area in the English countryside where thousands of soldiers prepared for the Normandy invasion. While other units conducted weapons training and amphibious assault drills, the men of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops unpacked their peculiar arsenal: inflatable Sherman tanks, collapsible artillery pieces made from wood and rubber, fake radio equipment, and portable sound systems capable of broadcasting battlefield noises across several miles. Their first major operation, codenamed Elephant, launched on June 15th, just 9 days after D-Day. The objective was deceptively simple yet strategically crucial: convince German forces that a major, American Armored Division was positioned near the front lines in one location while the actual division had secretly moved to attack elsewhere. The Ghost Army deployed near Château de Travers in Normandy, transforming an empty field into an apparently bustling military encampment virtually overnight. The operation required meticulous attention to detail that only artists could provide. Corporal Arthur Shilstone, a talented illustrator from Connecticut, supervised the placement of inflatable tanks, ensuring each cast appropriate shadows based on the sun's position. He understood that German aerial reconnaissance analysts would scrutinize photographs for inconsistencies. The inflatable tanks, manufactured by tire companies back in the States, were technological marvels, weighing just 100 pounds each yet appearing identical to the 30-ton Sherman tanks from 500 feet above. But visual deception was only one component. Technical Sergeant Harold Dahl, a sound engineer who had worked in radio before the war, orchestrated elaborate audio deceptions. His unit hauled massive speakers into positions along the front lines, then broadcast pre-recorded sounds of tank columns, shouted commands, and supply trucks rumbling through mud. According to accounts detailed in Rick Bayer's book, The Ghost Army of World War II, Dahl's team could project these sounds up to 15 miles, creating the auditory signature of a mechanized division where none existed. The radio deception proved equally sophisticated. Specialists tapped into German signal intelligence networks, creating false radio traffic that mimicked the communication patterns of legitimate American divisions. Operators would transmit coded messages about supply requisitions, casualty reports, and tactical movements, all completely fabricated but consistent with how genuine units communicated. German intelligence officers, listening to these intercepted transmissions, had no reason to doubt they were monitoring real American forces. The illusion was completed by special effects teams who added weathering to their dummy equipment. Fresh rubber tanks would look suspiciously pristine to German observers, so artists applied paint, mud, and artificial wear patterns. They slashed fake treads into the ground beneath inflatable vehicles. They scattered empty ration boxes and cigarette butts around campsites. Private Jack Massey, who had worked as a window dresser at Bloomingdale's department store, applied his merchandising expertise to staging these theatrical military sets, understanding that authenticity lay in the accumulation of small, convincing details. Operation Elephant succeeded beyond expectations. German units remained fixated on the Ghost Army's position while the real American Armored Division launched a devastating surprise attack 20 miles away. After the battle, captured German intelligence maps showed enemy analysts had identified exactly where the Ghost Army wanted them to look, marking concentrations of American armor that existed only in paint, rubber, and sound waves. The success of Elephant established the Ghost Army's value and earned them increasingly critical assignments. From Normandy through the autumn of 1944, they conducted operation after operation, each more audacious than the last. They impersonated the 2nd Armored Division, the 6th Armored Division, and multiple infantry regiments. They staged phantom river crossings, complete with bridging equipment and engineering battalions that were nothing more than painted canvas and recorded construction sounds. Yet this dangerous theater came with genuine risks. The Ghost Army typically operated within artillery range of German positions, sometimes just a few miles from enemy lines. Unlike regular deception units that worked far behind friendly territory, these artist soldiers placed themselves directly in harm's way. They couldn't defend themselves effectively, their rubber tanks fired no shells, their wooden artillery pieces launched no rounds. If German forces discovered the deception and attacked, the Ghost Army would be virtually defenseless. Several close calls hammered home this reality. During one operation near Brest, German artillery began ranging in on their position after spotting the dummy installations. The men scrambled to evacuate their inflatable equipment while shells exploded around them. Private Harold Lehner, an architecture student from Brooklyn, was wounded by shrapnel while deflating a rubber tank. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Men creating the illusion of military power were among the most vulnerable soldiers on the battlefield. The frozen forests of Luxembourg in December 1944 became the Ghost Army's most crucial theater of deception. Hitler's massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes, later known as the Battle of the Bulge, had thrown Allied plans into chaos. German panzer divisions had punched through thinly defended American lines, creating a dangerous salient that threatened to split Allied forces and potentially recapture the Belgian port of Antwerp. General Omar Bradley faced an impossible dilemma. He needed to rapidly redeploy forces to contain the German breakthrough, but moving divisions left dangerous gaps elsewhere along the front. If the Wehrmacht discovered these weakened positions, they could exploit them with secondary attacks. Bradley's staff turned to the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops with an urgent request. Could the Ghost Army make it appear that American divisions remained in positions they were actually abandoning? The mission, designated Operation Koblenz, began on December 20, 1944, in conditions that made deception work nearly impossible. Temperatures plummeted below zero. Heavy snow blanketed the region. The men of the Ghost Army, accustomed to working under cover of darkness, now had to erect their elaborate theatrical sets in howling winter storms while German patrol activity intensified. Corporal Ned Harris, a watercolor painter from Maine, found himself directing the placement of inflatable artillery pieces in a clearing outside Luxembourg City. His hands, numbed by cold even through 2 pairs of gloves, struggled with the inflation equipment. Each howitzer-shaped balloon required 30 minutes of pumping in the freezing temperatures versus 15 minutes in normal conditions. The rubber, stiffened by cold, resisted inflation and cracked more easily. Harris and his team worked through the night, knowing that German reconnaissance flights would resume at dawn. The sound deception teams faced equally brutal challenges. Sergeant Victor Dowd, a former recording studio engineer from Chicago, discovered that frozen ground transmitted sound differently than the soft earth they'd trained on. Worse, the cold affected their tube-based amplification equipment, causing electronic components to fail unpredictably. Dowd's unit spent hours troubleshooting technical problems while exposed to bitter winds, occasionally interrupted by the distant thump of artillery from the Bulge fighting just miles to the north. According to documents from the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center, Operation Koblenz represented the Ghost Army's largest deployment to date. They simulated 2 complete divisions, approximately 30,000 men, 300 tanks, and countless support vehicles using fewer than 1,200 actual soldiers and their inventory of deception equipment. The scale was audacious, perhaps reckless, but the strategic situation demanded risks. The radio deception component became particularly sophisticated. Technical Sergeant Dick Syracuse, who had studied electrical engineering at MIT before enlisting, coordinated a complex web of false communications. His team transmitted routine administrative messages, simulated supply requisitions for thousands of soldiers, and even broadcast fake personal messages that German intelligence would intercept. They created the electronic signature of a bustling divisional headquarters managing the daily operations of forces that existed only in the electromagnetic spectrum. What made this deception especially challenging was maintaining the illusion over an extended period. Previous Ghost Army operations typically lasted 48 to 72 hours, enough time for a real division to move into attack position. But Operation Koblenz needed to hold for nearly 2 weeks while American forces reorganized to counter the German offensive. That meant keeping the dummy installations realistic despite deteriorating weather conditions, maintaining consistent radio traffic patterns, and ensuring that every detail remained convincing to increasingly suspicious German intelligence officers. The Ghost Army supplemented their technical deception with human intelligence operations that bordered on performance art. Small teams, wearing the shoulder patches of the divisions they were impersonating, were sent into nearby Luxembourg City. They visited cafes, taverns, and shops, making sure to be overheard discussing their unit's activities. They complained about their commanding officers, speculated about upcoming movements, and behaved exactly like off-duty soldiers from legitimate combat divisions. Private Arthur Shilstone recalled entering a bar near the Luxembourg train station, wearing the 2nd Armored Division patch. He deliberately left behind a notebook containing sketches and notes that appeared to reference defensive positions, knowing that German intelligence had cultivated informants in the city. The notebook was entirely fabricated. Shilstone had spent 3 hours creating convincing-looking military sketches of positions that didn't exist, but if it fell into enemy hands, it would reinforce the larger deception. The psychological toll on these artist soldiers intensified during the Luxembourg operation. They lived with the knowledge that if their deception failed, German forces might exploit the gaps in American lines, potentially leading to thousands of casualties. Every morning, they scanned the horizon for German reconnaissance aircraft, knowing that a single suspicious photograph analyzed by a competent intelligence officer could unravel everything. Yet, as December turned to January 1945, Operation Koblenz achieved its objective. German forces, believing substantial American divisions remained in position around Luxembourg, failed to exploit the temporary weaknesses in Allied lines. The real American divisions completed their redeployment, sealed the Bulge salient, and began pushing German forces back. Post-war analysis of captured German intelligence documents revealed that Wehrmacht commanders had indeed believed the Ghost Army's Phantom divisions were genuine, basing tactical decisions on this false information. As Allied forces advanced toward the German heartland in early 1945, the Rhine River loomed as the final major geographic barrier. The Wehrmacht had destroyed most bridges during their retreat, transforming the Rhine into a natural fortress protecting the industrial Ruhr Valley. Allied commanders planned multiple river crossings to overwhelm German defenses, but they needed surprise. The Ghost Army received orders for their most ambitious deception yet. Convinced the Germans that the main Allied crossing would occur 30 miles north of the actual assault location. Operation Wirsinn launched on March 1, 1945, in the war-battered German town whose name it bore. The objective was straightforward, but execution proved nightmarishly complex. Simulate the Ninth Army preparing to force a major Rhine crossing near Wirsinn, while the real assault developed near Wesel. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If German forces concentrated at the wrong crossing point, thousands of American and British lives would be saved during the actual operation. The Ghost Army established their deception headquarters in a partially destroyed factory outside Wirsinn. Lieutenant Fox Strangways, an architect from Philadelphia who now commanded one of the camouflage battalions, coordinated the visual elements. His teams deployed more than 300 inflatable vehicles, including amphibious craft that suggested preparation for river assault operations. They constructed dummy pontoon bridges from timber and canvas, designed to be visible from German observation posts across the Rhine, but selling this deception required more than static displays. Corporal Bill Blass, the future fashion designer, led a team creating an entire phantom logistics operation. They staged supply dumps filled with empty crates painted to resemble ammunition boxes. They erected field hospitals with Red Cross markings. They even established fake motor pools with mechanics seemingly maintaining assault boats and amphibious vehicles. From German positions across the river, binoculars and telescopes would reveal exactly what Wehrmacht intelligence expected to see before a major river crossing: massive preparation, concentration of force, and the telltale bustle of an army preparing to attack. The sonic deception for Operation Wirsinn represented the Ghost Army's most sophisticated audio illusion. Sergeant John Haptus, a sound engineer who had worked on Broadway productions before the war, orchestrated a symphony of battlefield noises designed to be heard across the Rhine. His team positioned their massive speakers along the riverbank, then broadcast continuous sounds of engineering work: pile drivers, bulldozers, welding equipment, and the distinctive metallic clanging of pontoon bridge construction. Effort, who had invented technology the military was actively using, arrested for stealing at age 60. The incident was quietly resolved, but it underscored how completely she had been forgotten. The technological world, however, was accelerating toward the future Hetty had imagined. In the 1980s, the development of cellular networks faced a critical problem: how to allow multiple users to share limited radio spectrum without interference. Engineers at companies like Qualcomm discovered that frequency hopping spread spectrum and its related technique, direct sequence spread spectrum, could enable multiple simultaneous communications channels. The foundation of modern cellular technology rested on principles Hetty had patented 4 decades earlier. Then came the digital revolution. As personal computers emerged and the Internet developed, the need for wireless data transmission became critical. Engineers developing what would become Wi-Fi faced the same challenges Hetty had solved: how to transmit data wirelessly without interference, with security and reliability. The solution employed spread-spectrum technology directly descended from her patent. Similarly, Bluetooth technology for short-range wireless device communication used frequency hopping across 79 channels, a direct application of Hetty's core concept. The Global Positioning System, or GPS, which would transform navigation and eventually enable smartphone mapping, incorporated spread-spectrum technology to ensure signals could be received reliably and securely. Every time a phone triangulated its position using satellite signals, it employed principles from a patent filed by a Hollywood actress in 1942. The technological revolution of the late 20th century wireless everything was built on a foundation Hedy Lamarr had laid, while the world insisted she had nothing to offer but her face. And still, she received no recognition, no royalties, no acknowledgement. The patent had expired before the technology became commercially viable, so she had no legal claim to compensation. More fundamentally, the chain of attribution had broken. The engineers building modern wireless systems knew the concepts but not their origin. They had learned spread-spectrum principles from textbooks and technical papers that treated the ideas as general knowledge, never mentioning the unlikely inventors who had first conceived them. November 9, 1997. Hedy Lamarr turned 83 years old in her apartment in Castleberry, Florida, living in seclusion, rarely seeing anyone, her days of glamour and invention equally distant memories. Her health was declining, her finances modest, her place in history seemingly reduced to a footnote about Hollywood's golden age. She had no reason to expect that her scientific contribution would ever be acknowledged, let alone celebrated. The world had made its judgment about her value decades earlier. Then that same year, something extraordinary happened. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, a digital rights organization, decided to honor Hetty and George Antheil with a Pioneer Award for their invention of frequency hopping, spread-spectrum technology. Finally, 55 years after filing the patent, Hetty would receive public recognition for her scientific contribution. But in a twist that seemed to capture the entire trajectory of her life, Hetty refused to attend the ceremony. She sent a representative instead, unwilling to allow herself to be put on display one more time, unwilling to have cameras focus on her aged face when they had only valued her youth. The Pioneer Award began a cascade of recognition. As the story spread through technology circles and eventually to mainstream media, people were astonished to learn that a Hollywood actress from the 1940s had invented foundational technology behind modern wireless communication. The IEEE professional engineering organizations and technology historians began examining her contribution seriously. Articles appeared explaining how Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, and cellular networks all employed principles from her patent. According to reporting by the New York Times and other major publications during this period, the revelation sparked widespread fascination. Here was a narrative that challenged every assumption. The beautiful actress was secretly a brilliant inventor. The woman dismissed as mere decoration had created technology that would enable the smartphone age. The star told to stick to selling kisses had conceived innovations that male engineers initially couldn't recognize. It was a story of sexism, of unrecognized genius, of the price paid when society reduces people to one-dimensional stereotypes. In 1998, Hetty and Antheil's estate received the Electronic Frontier Foundation's Pioneer Award. That same year, the Ottawa Wireless Technology Forum gave Hetty a Technology Recognition Award. In 1999, she became the first woman to receive the Invention Convention's Bobby Nass Spirit of Achievement Award, a bronze sculpture representing innovation and creativity. The awards accumulated, each one acknowledging what should have been recognized in 1942. But recognition came too late for Hetty to fully enjoy it. By the late 1990s, she was in her mid-80s, dealing with declining health, largely confined to her Florida apartment. She gave a few interviews by phone, her voice weakened but still sharp. In one interview, she expressed satisfaction that her contribution was finally being acknowledged, but also bitterness about the decades of dismissal. "It's about time," she said simply when told about the various honors. The technology industry began explicitly crediting her. Qualcomm, the telecommunications giant whose code division multiple access technology built directly on spread spectrum principles, acknowledged her foundational work. Engineers writing about wireless technology history started including her story. Computer science and engineering programs began teaching about Hedy Lamarr alongside other technology pioneers, ensuring future generations would know that revolutionary innovation can come from the most unexpected sources. Yet the compensation question remained unresolved. The patent had expired in 1959, before the technology became commercially viable. Hedy received no royalties from the billions of dollars in commerce her invention enabled. Companies built empires on wireless technology descended from her patent while she lived modestly on her old Hollywood earnings and Social Security. The moral wrong was clear, but legally there was no remedy. The patent system had functioned exactly as designed, protecting inventions for 17 years, then releasing them to public use. No one had anticipated that some inventions would require 40 or 50 years to become technically and commercially feasible. The irony was perfect and painful. Hedy had been told repeatedly that her value lay only in her temporary physical beauty, not her permanent intellectual contribution. And the system proved this judgment correct, at least economically. Her beauty had earned her money during her youth. Her invention earned her nothing but belated recognition in her old age. January 19, 1999, Hedy Lamarr gave what would be one of her final interviews, speaking by phone from her Florida apartment with a reporter who wanted to understand the woman behind the invention. Her voice was elderly, but her mind remained sharp, mixing reminiscences about Hollywood with technical explanations of frequency hopping that demonstrated her continued grasp of the underlying principles. When asked how she felt about finally receiving recognition, she offered a response that captured a lifetime of being underestimated. "I can't understand why it took them so long. I gave it to them when it was most needed." The story of Hedy's unrecognized genius sparked broader conversations about women in science and technology, about how much innovation society had lost by dismissing half the population as intellectually inferior. Researchers began documenting similar cases. Rosalind Franklin's unacknowledged contribution to discovering DNA's structure, Ada Lovelace's pioneering computer programming concepts dismissed by contemporaries, countless women whose scientific work was credited to male colleagues or simply forgotten. Hedy's story became emblematic of systemic failures in recognizing and supporting women's intellectual contributions. Technology companies began using her story in recruitment materials and diversity initiatives, though this created its own complications. Was it genuine commitment to inclusion or just exploiting an inspiring narrative? The question remained open. What was undeniable was that Hedy's invention had become central to the digital revolution. Every smartphone contained multiple radios using spread spectrum technology, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, cellular data. The global telecommunications industry, worth trillions of dollars, rested partly on foundations she had laid in collaboration with George Antheil during those evening meetings in 1941. In late 1999, Hedy's health began seriously declining. She was 85 years old, had lived through the full span of the 20th century. From the last days of the Austro-Hungarian Empire through 2 world wars to the dawn of the Internet age. She had been worshipped and dismissed, celebrated and forgotten, objectified and underestimated. The technology she invented to help defeat fascism had instead enabled a communication revolution she couldn't have imagined. Billions of people carrying devices in their pockets that used her principles to connect wirelessly across the globe. On January 19, 2000, Hedy Lamarr died in her sleep in Castleberry, Florida, at the age of 85. Her son, Anthony Loder, spread her ashes in the Vienna woods, returning her symbolically to the Vienna of her childhood, the city where her father had taught her to understand how machines worked before Hollywood, before the fame and dismissal, before the long wait for recognition. She had lived just long enough to see her scientific contribution acknowledged, to know that history would remember her as more than a beautiful face. The obituaries revealed the growing awareness of her dual legacy. The New York Times, the Washington Post, major newspapers worldwide led with the invention rather than the film career. Hedy Lamarr, film star and inventor, dies at 85. Read the headlines. The articles explain spread-spectrum technology and its connection to modern wireless communications before mentioning Algiers or Samson and Delilah. This represented a fundamental shift in how she was perceived, the inventor who happened to be an actress, rather than the actress who happened to invent something. After her death, the recognition continued accelerating. In 2014, Hedy was inducted posthumously into the National Inventors Hall of Fame, joining Thomas Edison, the Wright brothers, and other titans of American innovation. Her plaque in the Hall of Fame stands as permanent testimony to her contribution, ensuring that visitors learning about American invention encounter her story alongside the others. The German military communications sector, in a historical irony she would have appreciated, began using systems descended from her patent, the very technology she had conceived while imprisoned in her first marriage to an arms dealer who supplied Nazi Germany. The Austrian government, which had barely acknowledged her during her life, erected a memorial. Vienna, the city that had launched her into a world that simultaneously worshipped and dismissed her, finally claimed her as one of its notable citizens, though now emphasizing her scientific contribution rather than her film career or scandalous past. 2025 and the world Hedy Lamarr helped create has become so ubiquitous that most people don't even think about it anymore. When someone pulls out a smartphone to check GPS directions while listening to music through Bluetooth headphones and simultaneously staying connected via Wi-Fi, they're using 3 different applications of spread-spectrum technology, 3 separate implementations of the principle. Hedy and George Antheil patented in 1942. The technology is simply embedded in daily life, invisible infrastructure that enables modern existence. The numbers tell the story of her impact with stunning clarity. According to current industry data from telecommunications research firms, there are over 14 billion active wireless devices in the world, more devices than humans. The global wireless telecommunications industry generates over $3 trillion annually. Wi-Fi alone, one direct application of spread-spectrum principles, is used by over half the world's population. Every GPS-guided navigation system, every Bluetooth speaker, every cellular data connection, every wireless security system, every remote-controlled drone all employ concepts from that patent filed during World War II. Technology historians and engineers have worked to establish clear lines of influence from Hedy's original patent to modern systems. Research published by the IEEE and documented by the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History has traced how military engineers in the 1960s implemented her frequency-hopping concepts, how these military applications migrated to commercial cellular networks in the 80s, and how they became fundamental to Wi-Fi protocols in the 90s. The technical lineage is unambiguous. Modern wireless technology descends directly from the secret communication system. What makes Hedy's contribution particularly remarkable is its cross-domain nature. She took insights from her first husband's weapons manufacturing discussions, combined them with her own engineering knowledge, collaborated with a composer who understood synchronized mechanical systems, and synthesized a solution that pure military engineers hadn't conceived. This interdisciplinary approach, bringing together knowledge from different fields, is now recognized as central to innovation, but it was rare in the hyper-specialized world of 1940s engineering. Her outsider status, which caused her invention to be dismissed, was actually her advantage. The feminist implications of her story continue resonating. Hedy's experience being valued only for appearance while her intellectual contributions were ignored remains painfully relevant. Women in STEM fields still report being underestimated, their ideas dismissed or attributed to male colleagues, their appearance commented on more than their work. Hedy's story is invoked regularly in discussions about diversity in technology, about the innovations society loses when it fails to recognize talent regardless of who presents it, about the cost of judging people based on one dimension of who they are. Educational institutions have embraced her story. Computer science departments use her as an example when teaching about spread-spectrum technology. Engineering programs include her in discussions of patent history and technology development. Primary and secondary schools teach about her as part of lessons on invention and perseverance. Her image, still striking, still undeniably beautiful, appears alongside explanations of frequency-hopping spread spectrum, a reminder that genius comes in forms society doesn't expect. In 2015, the documentary Bombshell, the Hedy Lamarr story, brought her full story to broader audiences, combining footage from her film career with technical explanations of her invention and interviews with people who knew her. The film emphasized the tragedy of her unrecognized genius, but also celebrated her ultimate vindication. It won awards at film festivals and introduced new generations to a story that challenged their assumptions about both Hollywood and innovation. Perhaps the most fitting tribute came from the technology industry itself. In November 2015, on what would have been Hedy's 101st birthday, Google featured her in a Google Doodle seen by billions of internet users worldwide. The animated illustration showed Hedy's face transforming into a diagram of spread spectrum technology, then into images of modern wireless devices, visually capturing her dual legacy. For one day, everyone searching the web encountered her story, a small moment of recognition for a woman who had waited decades to be understood. Today, when engineers discuss the foundations of wireless technology, when telecommunications companies trace the history of their industry, when students learn about the development of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and GPS, Hedy Lamarr's name appears prominently. The woman Hollywood told to stick to selling kisses is now recognized as a foundational figure in technology that transformed human communication. The invention dismissed by the United States Navy in 1942 enabled the smartphone revolution that began 60 years later. The story ends not with complete justice. Hedy never received the financial compensation her invention deserved, never lived to see the full scope of her impact, but with recognition, finally and permanently. The historical record has been corrected. Her contribution is established, inerasable, acknowledged by the very engineering and technology institutions that once would have dismissed her. The beautiful actress was also a brilliant inventor, and now everyone knows it. The face that launched 1,000 dismissals ultimately launched 1 billion connections, wireless signals carrying human communication across a planet that finally understands what she gave us. Her legacy is every wireless connection, every GPS coordinate, every Bluetooth device, every Wi-Fi network. It's the invisible infrastructure of modern life, the technology so embedded in daily existence that we barely notice it. And now, when we do notice it, when we think about where it came from, we remember the woman who conceived it while Hollywood insisted her only value was her beauty. Hedy Lamarr proved them all wrong, even if she had to wait a lifetime for the world to understand.